My son-in-law threw me off my own back porch and went inside to finish his coffee. I heard the wood of the railing crack a half-second before I felt my collarbone give. I landed face down in the gravel beside the garden bed, and I lay there for a moment looking up at a row of marigolds my wife Shirley had planted 3 springs before she died. Thinking, there is a cedar box in my workshop, and I know exactly what I'm going to put in it. He thought it was cash. The next morning, I drove 40 minutes to his house in a drizzle and set that box on his kitchen counter. He pulled it toward him, ran his thumb along the dovetail joints I'd cut by hand, and grinned like a man who'd already decided he'd won. Before I tell you what was inside, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling me what state you're listening from. I read every one of them. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years teaching shop class at Millbrook High School in Cuyahoga County, Ohio, and the best work I ever did was in a 12 by 16 foot room that smelled like sawdust and linseed oil. I built my first cedar chest when I was 19. I built my last one, a hope chest, for my daughter Paula's 16th birthday, the spring before I retired. Paula and her mother, Shirley, were the whole point of everything. Shirley died 22 months ago. Congestive heart failure. She was 63 years old, and she had been the kind of woman who remembered the names of every student I ever taught and sent Christmas cards to the ones who'd had hard lives. I don't have language for what it feels like to live in a house after someone like that leaves it. The best I can manage is this. Every room has an echo now. Paula had been married to my son-in-law for 5 years when Shirley died. He owned a sports nutrition business, supplements, protein powders, that sort of thing. He drove a truck that cost more than my pension pays in 2 years, and he had the handshake of a man who wanted you to know he worked out. Paula called him ambitious. Shirley called him slick. Once quietly, when she thought I wasn't in earshot, I kept my opinions filed somewhere I didn't have to look at them. The first time he asked me for money was 8 months after we buried Shirley. $15,000 to expand the product line. I said I needed time to think. He said Shirley would have wanted Paula to have every advantage. I changed the subject, and then I gave him the $15,000 anyway. I shouldn't have. The second time was 6 months after that. $20,000 for warehouse space. A real opportunity, he called it. I gave him 12 and told him it was everything I could manage. He accepted it the way a man accepts something he considers beneath what he deserves. The third time was a Saturday in March. He came alone. Paula wasn't with him, which was new, and walked around to the back of the house where I was sanding a rocking chair on the porch. He poured himself a cup from the thermothermos I'd brought outside and sat on the porch rail without asking. Dad, he said. He'd started calling me that 2 years ago. I hadn't invited it. There's a commercial property coming available in Westlake. Owner wants to move fast. $600 a square foot if I act by end of month. He paused. I need $50,000. I set the sandpaper down. You still owe me 15 from the first round, and 12 from the second. His jaw moved side to side, the way it did before he said something he'd calculated. That's coming back around. This is about the future. $27,000 isn't the past to me. He stood up off the railing and stepped toward me the way fast tempers move. Quick and committed, no hesitation in it. He got both hands on the front of my flannel shirt and shoved. I'd been standing close to the back railing, the one I'd been meaning to re-anchor since the previous fall. When my weight hit it, the post shifted. My right shoulder caught it at the wrong angle as I grabbed for it, and I felt something go that bones aren't supposed to go. I went down off the step into the gravel on one knee, then forward onto my palms. He stood on the porch looking down at me. He picked up his coffee cup. Think about what I said. I need an answer by Friday. Then he went inside. I heard him set the cup in the sink. I heard his truck start. I heard him leave. I stayed in the gravel for about 2 minutes. I knew what a broken bone felt like. I'd broken my wrist in 1998 on a ladder, and I knew this was worse. Then I got up slowly, holding my right arm against my chest, and I walked to the kitchen phone. I didn't call 911. I called my daughter. She came in 40 minutes. When she saw me, she made a sound I hope never to hear from anyone I love again. A compressed, swallowed thing. The kind of sound that's been trained quiet over a long time. Her hands went toward my shoulder and then pulled back, afraid to touch. He did this, she said, not a question. Paula, how long? She started to shake her head. How long has he been doing things like this to you?" She sat down on the porch step and put her face in her hands, and I had my answer without needing another word. I found out later it had started in year 2. Small at first, a grabbed wrist, a door slammed close enough to her face that she flinched. Then bigger. He was careful about it. Men like him are almost always careful. I want to be honest about what I did next, because I know what it looks like. I told her to go home. I told her to act like nothing had changed, that I needed one night. She didn't want to. I told her I understood that, and I told her what I needed her to do. Pack a small bag tonight. Put it somewhere he wouldn't think to look, and be ready to leave the moment I called. She nodded. I could see the fear in the way she held her own elbows, and it took everything I had not to tell her to stay. But I knew that if she didn't come home, he'd know something had shifted. An animal who thinks he's still got ground to stand on is easier to handle than one who knows he's cornered. I needed one more night of him, thinking he'd gotten away with it. After she left, I called Harriet Swan. Harriet had been on the Teachers Union legal committee for 15 years before she went into private practice. We'd served on the same grievance panel in 2003. She was careful and thorough, and she had the kind of quiet patience that made opposing attorneys nervous. I hadn't called her in 6 years. She answered on the 3rd ring. "It's Vern," I said. A pause. "Vern Colby, Lord, you sound like you're in pain." "Broken collarbone. My son-in-law. I need someone who handles assault, and someone who handles divorce, and someone who can do both fast. Don't take anything for the pain yet. Don't shower. Don't change your shirt." A pause. "When did it happen?" 2 hours ago." "Good. Window's still good. I'm sending my associate. Go straight to St. John's. I'll meet you there." St. John's Medical Center documented a displaced fracture of the right clavicle, bruising consistent with being grabbed and pushed from behind, and abrasions across both palms from catching myself in gravel. Harriet photographed everything with her own camera, got a written statement from the ER attending, and had me dictate a full account into her phone while it was still fresh in every detail. She drove me home at midnight. "Tell me what you want," she said, the wipers going slow against a light rain. I told her. I wanted my daughter safely out of that house. I wanted the money he'd taken from me accounted for. I wanted him to face what he'd done to Paula and to anyone else he'd done it to. And I told her there was one more thing, that I wanted to be the one to hand him whatever ended it. She glanced over at me. "What does that mean exactly?" "I'll show you tomorrow." In my workshop, on the shelf between a set of hand planes and a framed photograph of my first shop class from 1989, there was a cedar box I'd built 3 years ago as a demonstration piece. Dovetail joints, hand-rubbed oil finish, solid brass hinges. I'd never sold it and never given it away. It had just sat there, holding the smell of the wood and waiting. The next morning, I called my son-in-law at 8. He answered on the first ring. His voice was easy and bright. The voice of a man who'd had a good night's sleep after an ugly afternoon and considered that a reasonable sequence of events. "Dad, how are you feeling? Listen, about yesterday, I get hot sometimes. You know how it is with me. I've been thinking about what you said," I told him. "About the opportunity. About the future. Can I come over?" A pause, just long enough. "Yeah, of course, Paula's at her sister's." Paula didn't have a sister. She was an only child. I'd known that for 38 years. I loaded the cedar box into the truck with my good arm and drove to their subdivision. It was the kind of neighborhood built for people who wanted to look like they had more than they did. Identical sod lawns, fresh paint, young trees too small to give any shade. He met me at the door in a quarter zip and clean jeans. He had combed his hair. He'd sprayed on cologne. He looked at the box the way a hungry man looks at a covered plate. He carried it to the kitchen island, ran both hands over the lid. "You made this?" I did. "It's beautiful work." He smiled, that easy, winning smile. "Dad, you made the right call. I know this isn't easy, coming around like this." "Open it," I said. He unlatched the brass clasps. He lifted the lid. I watched his face go through 3 expressions in under 2 seconds. First, confusion because there was no money, no envelope, no folded check. Second, a slow and wary recognition because he could read, and he was reading the top document. Third, all the color draining out of him, steady and complete, the way water pulls back before a wave. On top was a letter from the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office, confirming receipt of a criminal complaint, felony assault, filed that morning. Beneath it, a packet from Harriet's office, a petition for legal separation signed by Paula at my kitchen table at 6 in the morning, her handwriting deliberate and level. Beneath that, a restraining order, effective immediately, prohibiting him from contacting Paula, from coming within 500 feet of my property, and from contacting me except through counsel. Service was completed when he accepted the box. His own doorbell camera, the one mounted above his kitchen pantry, had recorded the whole thing. What is this? Not a question, a flat drain statement. The top one is the criminal complaint, I said. The second is the separation petition. Paula signed it herself. The third is the protective order. You've been on your own camera since I walked in. His head went up to the small black dome above the pantry, then back to me. There's one more thing, I said. At the bottom. He lifted the documents out and set them on the counter. Wrapped in a piece of shop cloth at the bottom of the cedar box was a single folded page. A printout of a text conversation between him and a woman whose name Harriet's associate had pulled from a business registration 3 weeks earlier. The messages were 4 months old. They had nothing to do with business. He went from white to red in about 4 seconds. How did you? Paula has known for over a year, I said. She stayed because she had nowhere to go. Now she does. I turned around and walked to his front door. He said my name once, and then he said something I won't repeat, and I stepped outside and pulled the door shut behind me. I drove 3 blocks and pulled into a church parking lot and sat there while the rain moved in from the west. My hands were shaking too hard to keep on the wheel. I sat in that parking lot for a while and let myself feel all of it at once, the anger and the grief and a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from holding yourself together by willpower alone for too long. Then I dried my face on the back of my good hand and drove home. Paula was already there. Her car was in the driveway. She'd brought 1 suitcase and a paper bag with her coffee maker, because she knew I only had a percolator and she'd never been able to tolerate it. I sat down on the porch step beside her. It's done, I said. She leaned her head against my good shoulder and we sat there while the rain came in from the west and the marigolds bent a little in the wind. Harriet's associate, a young woman named Perry who seemed to run on legal pads and black coffee, spent the next 2 weeks making calls. What she turned up opened the whole thing wider than I'd expected. She found Gus Henley, who had been my son-in-law's original business partner when the supplement company launched. Gus had put in $28,000 and 3 years of his life, and when the business turned its first small profit, my son-in-law had restructured the LLC in a way that diluted Gus's stake to near nothing and pushed him out. Gus had signed documents he didn't fully understand because he trusted the man across the table. He'd consulted a lawyer, been told it would cost more to fight than he could recover, and he'd let it go. He was 59 years old, and he'd been carrying that loss quietly for 4 years. Perry found a woman named Dottie who lived 2 streets from Paula and my son-in-law. She was 74, a retired postal clerk, and 18 months ago my son-in-law had come to her door with a story about a bridge loan and a guaranteed return. He'd told her he was a neighbor, that she could trust him. She'd given him $6,000 from her savings account, and he'd never come back. She'd told no one because she was certain she must have misunderstood the arrangement, that maybe she was the one who'd gotten confused. I drove over there myself. She made tea. Her living room was filled with framed photographs of grandchildren. She sat with both hands wrapped around her mug and told me she'd been afraid she was losing her mind. You weren't confused about anything, I told her. And you're not the only one he did this to. Her eyes filled. I thought I was stupid. You were trusting. There's a real difference. He practiced on people. He knew exactly what he was looking for. Perry also found a drywall contractor named Melvin, who was owed $9,000 for work on my son-in-law's commercial showroom. Months of unanswered calls and stalled payments, until my son-in-law had threatened to dispute the whole invoice and countersue. Melvin had a family. He'd let it go. I made a mistake during this time. I went on Facebook one evening, after my son-in-law's mother called Paula and accused her of destroying the family, and I wrote a post. I didn't name anyone. I said something about how the men who borrow your trust the loudest are usually the ones who deserve it the least. and how staying quiet to keep the peace is a kindness that only moves in one direction. By morning, his lawyer had a screenshot. Harriet called before I'd finished my first cup of coffee. "Take it down," she said. I did. "It doesn't change the facts," she told me that afternoon. "But it gives them a story. They're going to say this is personal, that you're out to humiliate him, not to seek justice. Every time they wave that post, we lose a little room." She was right. I wrote it on a scrap of wood with a marking pen and tacked it to my workshop wall, where I could read it whenever I was tempted to say something I couldn't take back. When you are hurt and right and angry, you are most dangerous to your own cause. The criminal case went to Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Court in September. The courtroom had that institutional smell, floor wax and old paper, and the particular quiet of a room where hard things get decided every day and the walls have stopped paying attention. Paula testified first. She had spent 4 months in therapy with a counselor who specialized in coercive control, and she had done the kind of work that turns fear back into clarity. When the prosecutor asked whether the defendant had ever physically harmed her, she sat up straight and said, "The first time was in our second year. He grabbed me by the throat during an argument about money and told me to lower my voice. The most recent time was 11 days before he injured my father. He twisted my arm behind my back until I said I was sorry." She didn't cry until she said the word sorry. Then she stopped, breathed through it, and kept going. Gus testified. Dottie testified, small and steady in a blue cardigan, reading from notes she'd made herself in a spiral notebook, refusing to be rattled by the defense attorney's attempts to suggest she'd simply misremembered the arrangement. Melvin testified. Between them, they drew something that no single incident could draw on its own. A pattern unmistakable and documented, of a man who had made a practice of finding people who trusted him and using that trust up entirely before moving on. My son-in-law took the stand against his attorney's advice. I was certain of it. Men who have spent years charming their way out of every consequence believe they can charm their way out of anything, including 12 people in a jury box who have been watching them for 2 days and have already made up their minds. He contradicted himself twice on the timeline. He became contemptuous during questioning about Dottie in a way that read badly in a room full of people. When the prosecutor raised the text messages, he turned to the gallery and pointed at me and said, "That man has had it out for me since the day I married his daughter." The judge told him to face forward. The jury came back in 11 hours, guilty on the assault charge, guilty on a fraud count the prosecutor had built from Gus's testimony and the LLC restructuring documents. 18 months at the Cuyahoga County Correctional Center, with the possibility of early release at 12. Restitution to Gus, to Dottie, to Melvin, and to me. A 5-year protective order for Paula. When the bailiff stepped toward him, he didn't look at his mother, who was crying in the 3rd row. He didn't look at Paula. He looked at me. I held his gaze the way you hold a door, steady, without effort, until he looked away first. Paula and I drove home in a quiet that felt different from all the quiet that had come before it. She made spaghetti for dinner because Shirley used to make it on nights when something hard had happened and you needed something warm that didn't require thinking. We ate at the dining table. Outside, the September dark came in early over the backyard. After a long while, Paula said, "Daddy, was it worth it?" I thought about that the way she deserved to have it thought about. "I sleep lighter now," I said. "I look at people with a question in me I didn't used to carry. I found out there was cruelty closer to home than I'd let myself see, and once you know that, you can't unknow it. So in that sense, no, nothing that costs those things is worth it." She was quiet. "But Dottie gets her money back," I said. "Gus gets some of what he lost. Your mother's savings are going to do what she intended them to do. And you're sitting in this house tonight, and he has no idea where you are." I paused. The other path was leaving all of that alone. That wasn't better, it was just quieter. Paula reached across the table and took my hand. We sat like that while the clock on the mantel ticked, and the refrigerator hummed, and the neighborhood outside settled into its ordinary evening sounds. Later, she asked if we could go out to the workshop. Not to make anything, just to be out there the way we used to when she was small and couldn't sleep. She used to sit on the old stool in the corner and watch me plane wood and just breathe, and somehow that was enough to make whatever had been wrong feel smaller. So we went. I turned on the shop light, and it threw everything in that warm amber color that wood and sawdust make in old incandescent light. I picked up a piece of walnut I'd been meaning to get to and started fitting it against a frame. Just something to do with my hands. Paula sat on the stool in the corner. The cedar box was on the shelf between the hand planes and the class photograph. I'd brought it back from his house the morning after. It was empty now. I'd thought a lot about what to put back in it. I'd decided, nothing. Some things you build to prove you still can. Some things you carry somewhere difficult and set down and walk away from lighter than you came. The box could sit there and be what it was. Good wood, good joints. A thing made with care that had done exactly what it needed to do. Paula fell asleep on the stool with her cheek against the wall, the way she used to when she was 7 years old, and the workshop was the safest place she knew. I kept working until the night went quiet around us, and then a little longer than that, because the wood was good, and my hands remembered what to do, and the people I loved were close, and the worst of it was finally behind us.